Hey everyone, I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying upload. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more of the content you love. I never thought a simple dating app match would lead to the most terrifying night of my life. Looking back, every normal decision I made that evening somehow led to 5 hours that shouldn't have been possible. I still can't explain what happened, but I need to write it down while the details are fresh in my mind. Last week I matched with Alex on Bumble. He seemed normal, had a stable job as an accountant, decent photos that weren't just gym selfies, and could actually hold a conversation. After texting for a few days, we planned to meet at Vincenzo's, this new Italian place downtown that I'd been wanting to try. The evening started perfectly normal. I got there first, grabbed a table, and when Alex walked in, I was relieved to see he looked exactly like his photos. He was wearing a blue button-down shirt and had this friendly smile that put me at ease immediately. The conversation flowed naturally over pasta and wine. We discovered we both had golden retrievers, loved hiking, and shared an unhealthy obsession with true crime podcasts. 3 hours flew by, and before I knew it, the restaurant was preparing to close. Since I'd taken an Uber there, Alex offered to drive me home. It was only about 15 minutes away, and he seemed completely genuine, so I agreed. That's when everything started to feel wrong. Alex typed my address into his car's GPS. I remember clearly it was 11:42 p.m. when we left the restaurant. The first few minutes were fine as we drove through downtown, past the lit-up shops and late-night crowds. But then the GPS told us to turn onto Miller Road, which didn't make sense because my place was in the opposite direction. Alex followed the GPS, and we ended up on these back roads I'd never seen before. The street lights became scarcer and the houses disappeared altogether. I started feeling uneasy when I noticed we hadn't passed another car for at least 10 minutes. The GPS kept recalculating, sending us down increasingly remote streets that seemed to get narrower and darker. Around 11:47 p.m. we came across this gas station. Even in the dark I could tell it had been abandoned for years. The windows were broken, the sign was missing letters, and the gas pumps were rusted beyond recognition. There was this strange greenish light coming from inside, but it was faint and flickering. We decided to turn around, but somehow every turn led us back to that same gas station. The first couple of times we thought we were just disoriented. By the fourth time, panic started setting in. I tried using my phone's GPS, but it showed us in completely different locations each time I checked. Then both our phones died simultaneously, not like a normal battery drain, but an instant blackout. The car's GPS started showing impossible directions, with road names that kept changing and arrows pointing in directions that didn't exist. The temperature dropped dramatically. I could see my breath in the car, even though it was a warm summer night. The air felt thick and heavy, like being underwater. Each time we passed the gas station, small details were different. Sometimes there were 3 gas pumps, sometimes 4. The broken sign would be on different sides of the building. Once there was an old pickup truck parked outside that wasn't there before, covered in rust and missing its wheels. Another time, I saw movement behind one of the broken windows, a dark shape that seemed to watch us pass. The car's electronics started acting strange. The radio would turn on by itself, playing static that sounded almost like whispers or distant crying. The headlights would flicker, leaving us in complete darkness for heart-stopping moments. The dashboard clock stayed frozen at 11:47 p.m., even though we must have been driving for hours. The darkness outside the car was absolute. No stars, no moon, not even the usual light pollution you'd expect near a city. It was like we were driving through a void. We tried following different roads, but they all seemed to loop back. We passed empty fields that seemed to go on forever, abandoned farmhouses that appeared and disappeared in the darkness, and intersections that led nowhere. I started noticing marks on the road tire tracks that looked exactly like the ones we were making. It was like we were driving over our own trail again and again, but that was impossible. We should have run out of gas, but the fuel gauge never moved from half full. The worst part was seeing other versions of that gas station in the distance. Sometimes we'd catch glimpses of it in multiple directions at once, like reflections in a broken mirror. Each one looked slightly different, some more destroyed, others almost new, but all giving off that same sickly green light. After what felt like hours, something changed. We saw headlights in the rearview mirror. They appeared suddenly, like someone had switched them on right behind us. We followed them, and suddenly the road started making sense again. Street signs became readable, familiar landmarks appeared, and before we knew it, we were back on the main highway. When we finally pulled up to my house, our phones came back to life simultaneously. The time showed 11:52 p.m. Somehow, only 5 minutes had passed since we first saw that gas station, but it felt like we'd been trapped in that loop for hours. The car's GPS was working perfectly again, showing our location clearly. Alex and I sat there for a moment, too shocked to speak. The normal sounds of the city, distant traffic, dogs barking, sirens, felt surreal after the absolute silence we'd been trapped in. I practically ran inside my house, and Alex drove away quickly. We texted once the next day, just to confirm that it had really happened, but we never met again. I tried to find that gas station later, drove around in daylight, looked at maps, but there was no trace of it or any of the roads we'd been on. Even the tire tracks I'd sworn we'd left had vanished. I still drive at night sometimes, but I always stick to main roads now. Sometimes when I wake up at 11:47 p.m., I wonder if somewhere, in some version of that night, we're still driving past that gas station, trapped in that endless loop. I never thought a coffee shop could become the setting of my worst nightmare. It started last month when I finally caved and downloaded Tinder after months of my friends pestering me about being single. Within a few days, I matched with Sarah. Her profile was simple, a few normal selfies, a photo with a dog, and a bio about loving hiking and true crime podcasts. Looking back, maybe that last part should have been a red flag. We planned to meet at the Daily Grind, this small coffee shop downtown that I'd picked because it was always quiet enough to actually have a conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, mostly out of first date nervousness, and chose a table near the back window. The place was pretty empty, just a few regulars typing away on their laptops. The moment she walked in, something felt wrong. She didn't look around or check her phone like most people meeting someone for the first time. Instead, she walked straight to my table with this knowing smile, like we were old friends meeting for our weekly coffee catch-up. I hadn't even told her what I'd be wearing. As I started to introduce myself, she cut me off by mentioning how the project at my startup must be keeping me busy. I froze. I hadn't mentioned anything about work in my profile or during our brief chat on the app. Before I could ask how she knew, she started talking about Max, my German Shepherd, and how she thought it was sweet that I still took him to the vet on Carlton Street even though it was far from my new apartment. My mouth went dry. I'd only moved to that apartment 3 weeks ago. She kept going, describing my morning routine in detail, how I grabbed coffee from Pete's Corner Store every morning at 7:15, took Max to Riverside Park for exactly 30 minutes, then caught the 8:10 train to work. She even knew about the sandwich shop where I'd started getting lunch after finding a hair in my food at my usual place last week. The coffee in front of me went cold as she continued. She mentioned my sister's destination wedding in Cancun, even noting how emotional my toast had been. That wedding wasn't posted anywhere online. We'd kept it private at my sister's request. She knew about the minor fender bender I'd had 3 days ago, the new plant I'd bought for my office, and even the phone call I'd had with my mom last night about her garden. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put down my cup. The cheerful barista who'd taken my order was now watching our table with a concerned expression. Sarah seemed oblivious to my discomfort, still smiling that same unsettling smile as she casually mentioned how much I looked like my childhood photos, especially the one from my 5th birthday party in my grandma's backyard. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. People turned to look, but I didn't care. I mumbled something about feeling sick and needing to leave. As I rushed toward the door, my eyes fixed on the exit sign like a lifeline, she called out, "Bye, Bug," the nickname my late grandfather had given me, one I hadn't heard since he passed away 10 years ago. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys so badly I dropped them twice. The drive home was a blur of paranoid glances in my rearview mirror. Once home, I locked every window and door, then sat in my bathroom having what felt like the longest panic attack of my life. Over the next few days, I dismantled my entire digital life, deleted dating apps, changed all passwords, made everything private. I filed a police report, but they seemed uninterested since she hadn't made any threats. I changed my routine completely, switching up everything from my coffee shop to my route to work. A week passed, and I started to feel slightly less paranoid. Then I got that Facebook friend request, a blank profile with a series of numbers for a name. The only post was a photo taken that morning of me getting coffee at my new spot across town. The timestamp showed it was taken just hours ago. I stayed at my parents' house for the next 2 weeks. When I finally got the courage to go back to the Daily Grind and ask about the security footage, the manager showed me something impossible. The video from that day showed me sitting alone, having an animated conversation with an empty chair for 20 minutes before suddenly leaving in a panic. That was a month ago. I've moved apartments since then, changed my phone number, even got a new job. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can feel someone watching me, and every morning there's a fresh cup of coffee on my doorstep. I still can't make sense of what happened that night. It's been 3 months since my date with Sarah, and I keep replaying everything in my head, trying to understand. We met on Tinder, pretty normal these days. Her profile was simple, 27, works in marketing, loves hiking and true crime podcasts. We messaged for about a week before deciding to meet at this cozy Italian place downtown. The date itself was great. Sarah was exactly like her photos, shoulder-length brown hair, green eyes, and this really genuine smile. We talked for hours about our jobs, families, and shared a tiramisu that she insisted was the best in the city. Everything felt natural, none of that first date awkwardness you usually get. Around 10 p.m., we decided to call it a night. She had an early meeting the next day, and I had to finish some work from home. I offered to walk her to her car, but she said she'd parked really close by and would be fine. We hugged goodbye, and I watched her walk toward the parking garage before heading to my own car. The weird stuff started about 45 minutes after I got home. I was settling in to do some work when my phone rang. Unknown number. I usually don't answer those, but something made me pick up this time. The sound on the other end still haunts me. Sarah was breathing heavily, like she'd been running. Her voice was shaking, and I could tell she was crying. She kept saying she didn't know where she was, that everything was dark and she needed help. The connection was terrible, breaking up every few seconds. Then the call just cut off. My hands were shaking as I tried calling back. The number wasn't working anymore, just that automated message saying it wasn't in service. I immediately tried calling her regular number from our previous texts, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent messages on Tinder, but they wouldn't go through. That's when I noticed something really strange. Her Tinder profile had disappeared completely. Not unmatched, just gone, like it never existed. I checked Instagram where we'd followed each other earlier that night. Her profile was gone too. I stayed up all night trying to find any trace of her online. The marketing company she said she worked for had no record of any Sarah matching her description. The university she mentioned graduating from couldn't confirm anything either. The next morning I went to the police. They took my statement but didn't seem too concerned. According to them, without any proof of foul play or even proof that Sarah existed, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested she might have been using a fake identity and decided to ghost me. But that call felt too real. The fear in her voice, the desperation, you can't fake that. I drove around the city for days, checking every parking garage near the restaurant. I put up posts on local community forums. Nothing. The strangest part? When I went back to the restaurant a week later to ask if anyone remembered seeing us, they said their security cameras had been down that whole week for maintenance. The hostess who'd seated us wasn't working there anymore, and none of the other staff remembered us. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but I still have the receipt from that night, with 2 meals and that tiramisu we shared. I keep it in my wallet now, just to remind myself that it was real. Sarah was real. 3 months later, and I still jump every time my phone rings with an unknown number. I've probably answered hundreds of spam calls hoping to hear her voice again. I've stopped dating completely. Can't bring myself to trust meeting someone new. Last week I thought I saw her at a coffee shop across the street from my office. Same brown hair, same green jacket she wore on our date. I ran across the street, nearly getting hit by a car, but when I got there, the woman turned around and it wasn't her. The barista told me no one matching Sarah's description had been there. I know how this sounds. Trust me, I've gone over every logical explanation. Maybe she was a scammer who got cold feet. Maybe she was married and got caught. Maybe she really did just want to ghost me in the most elaborate way possible. But none of those explanations account for that terrifying phone call. I still can't delete her number from my phone, even though it never works. Sometimes late at night, I find myself staring at it, wondering if she's out there somewhere, still trying to get help. The not knowing is the worst part. Every dark parking garage, every abandoned building I pass, I can't help but wonder if she's in there, waiting for someone to find her. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Most days, I barely believe it myself. But if you ever meet someone named Sarah who loves hiking and true crime podcasts, who orders tiramisu and insists it's the best in the city, maybe ask her about that Italian restaurant downtown. I matched with Mark on Hinge last week. His profile was pretty standard 28, graphic designer into hiking and photography. We had good back-and-forth messaging, and his Instagram checked out with plenty of normal photos going back several years. He suggested meeting at Bella's, this cozy Italian place downtown that I'd been wanting to try. When I arrived at 7 p.m., he was already waiting outside. Blonde hair styled neatly, bright blue eyes, and wearing a navy sweater that looked exactly like the one from his profile pictures. He was about my height, maybe 5 feet 9 inches, with an athletic build. Everything seemed perfectly normal as we walked in, and the host led us to a corner table near the window. The restaurant had this warm, intimate lighting with candles on each table. We ordered drinks, a glass of red wine for me, craft beer for him. The conversation flowed naturally as we discussed our jobs. He told me about this big design project he was working on for a tech startup, and his eyes lit up when he talked about the creative process. I first noticed something was off when our appetizers arrived. As I was dipping bread into the olive oil, I glanced up and had this weird moment where I couldn't quite focus on his face. It was like looking at a photo that's slightly out of alignment. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, his hair seemed darker, more of a dirty blonde than the light blonde from earlier. Throughout the main course, the changes became more noticeable. His hair kept darkening gradually, like someone was slowly adjusting the saturation on a photo. His face structure started shifting too. His jaw became more defined, his cheekbones more pronounced. The weird part was that these changes happened so smoothly, like watching a slow-motion transformation, but he never left the table, not even once. By the time our pasta dishes arrived, his eyes had changed from bright blue to a greenish hazel. His nose was different too, slightly longer, with a small bump that hadn't been there before. He was also definitely taller. Even sitting down, I could see his legs had to adjust under the table to fit. I kept trying to find logical explanations. Maybe the wine was affecting my vision, but I'd only had one glass and I was drinking water for most of the meal. Maybe it was the lighting, but the couple at the next table looked completely normal. I even pretended to check my phone so I could look at his profile picture again. The difference was startling. The most unsettling part was his behavior. It never changed. He maintained the same enthusiasm talking about design, laughed at the same types of jokes, and had the same slight nervous habit of running his hand through his hair, which was now light brown. He showed me pictures on his phone of a recent hiking trip, and I could see his appearance in the photos changing to match whatever he looked like at that moment. During dessert, I was barely keeping it together. The man sitting across from me was now at least 6 inches taller than when we'd started dinner, with dark brown hair, deep brown eyes, and an entirely different face structure. His sweater, which had fit perfectly at the beginning of the night, now looked slightly small on his broader frame. I started feeling claustrophobic, trapped in this bizarre situation that no one else seemed to notice. The waiter kept coming by, acting like everything was normal. Other diners carried on with their meals. Meanwhile, I was watching someone transform like a human chameleon. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my spoon. I made up an excuse about feeling sick and needing to leave. When we stood up, the height difference was shocking. He was now towering over me. His voice, which had been gradually deepening throughout dinner, was almost unrecognizable from our first greeting. Outside the restaurant, he suggested getting coffee sometime next week. The streetlight illuminated his face, and I could see he was still changing, his features continuing to shift subtly. I mumbled something about being busy and practically ran to my car. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror. His silhouette on the sidewalk seemed to ripple and distort until I turned the corner. When I got home, I immediately checked his dating profile. It had vanished completely, along with our entire conversation history. I tried finding him on Instagram, where I'd seen all those photos earlier, but that account was gone too. The only proof I had was the receipt from Bella's in my purse. I haven't told anyone about this yet. How could I? It sounds completely insane. I went back to Bella's the next day, hoping the staff might remember something, but they just gave me blank looks when I described either version of him. I even checked local news, wondering if anyone else had experienced something similar, but found nothing. It's been 24 hours, and I still can't make sense of what happened. Was he aware of the changes? Was it some kind of elaborate prank, a hallucination? Whatever it was, I know what I saw. Someone who went from being a medium-height, blonde, blue-eyed man to a tall, dark-haired stranger over the course of 2 hours. And somewhere out there, he might still be changing, becoming someone new, while the rest of the world carries on like nothing strange is happening at all. I've been staring at my phone for the past hour, trying to make sense of what happened last Friday. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face changing from normal to terrified in an instant. I need to write this down while it's still fresh, even though part of me wants to forget it ever happened. It started like any other Tinder match. Mike's profile was refreshingly normal in a sea of shirtless gym selfies and fish photos. He had a genuine smile, worked as a software developer, and his bio actually made me laugh. We matched on a Tuesday, and after a few days of easy conversation about our favorite hiking trails and sharing dog photos, We decided to meet at Bella Italia downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly from first date nerves and partly because I'm always early to everything. The restaurant was busy for a Friday night, with that comfortable buzz of conversation and clinking glasses. I chose a table near the window, not too isolated but private enough for good conversation. When Mike walked in, I felt relieved. He looked exactly like his photos, maybe even better in person. He wore a crisp blue button-down that matched his eyes, dark jeans, and a confident smile. The first part of the date was surprisingly comfortable. We talked about our jobs, and he shared funny stories about his coding disasters. He remembered details from our chats, like my sister's upcoming wedding and my golden retriever's unfortunate encounter with a skunk last month. He even ordered the same wine I did, joking about how he usually pretends to know more about wine than he actually does. Everything changed right after we ordered our main courses. I was in the middle of telling him about my recent camping trip when I noticed his expression shift. At first, it was subtle. His eyes started darting around the restaurant like he was trying to get his bearings. Then he began rubbing his temples, wincing as if in pain. His face drained of color so quickly I thought he might be having some kind of medical emergency. When I asked if he was okay, the way he looked at me made my blood run cold. There was no recognition in his eyes anymore, just pure confusion and fear. His hand started trembling as he reached for his water glass, nearly knocking it over. He kept looking around the restaurant with increasing panic, like someone who just woke up in a strange place. That's when he started checking his pockets, pulling out his phone and wallet like he'd never seen them before. I watched as he scrolled through his phone with shaking hands, his breathing getting more rapid with each swipe. He examined his credit cards and driver's license as if they belonged to someone else, even though they clearly showed his face and name. The waiter arrived with our mushroom risotto and pasta, but the food just sat there getting cold. Mike, or whoever he was, became more agitated by the minute. He kept touching his face and clothes like he was trying to confirm they were real. When he looked in his wallet again, he pulled out a business card and stared at it with such intensity I thought it might burst into flames. The worst part was how his personality completely vanished. The confident, funny guy from 20 minutes ago was gone, replaced by someone who seemed lost in his own skin. His voice even changed. Gone was the warm, friendly tone, replaced by something uncertain and scared. He kept glancing at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. I've heard about people having psychotic breaks or bad drug reactions, but this felt different. It wasn't just confusion or disorientation. It was like watching someone realize they were living someone else's life. The terror in his eyes looked too real to be an act. After about 10 minutes of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself to the bathroom, hands shaking as I texted my roommate to call me with a fake emergency. I stopped by the host stand and quietly asked them to call me a cab, making up a story about feeling sick. Through the window, I could see him still at our table, now frantically typing something on his phone. While waiting outside for my cab, I saw him leave the restaurant. He was walking strangely, almost stumbling, stopping random passers-by on the street. I ducked behind a parked car until he passed. The last I saw of him, he was heading toward the park, still stopping people and seemingly asking for help. As soon as I got home, I blocked his number and removed our match. The next morning, his entire profile had vanished from Tinder. I tried searching for him on social media, but it's like he never existed. The software company he said he worked for has no record of anyone by his name. I haven't told many people about what happened. It sounds too bizarre to be true. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I remember the receipt from Bella Italia still in my purse with 2 untouched meals on it. I drove past the restaurant yesterday, and for a moment I thought I saw him sitting at our same table, but it was just someone else in a blue shirt. I don't know what happened to Mike that night, or if that was even his real name. Maybe he had some kind of breakdown, or maybe something stranger was at work. All I know is that somewhere out there might be a man walking around in someone else's life, trying to figure out who he really is. I was so excited for my first date with Jake. We'd been chatting online for weeks, and he seemed like such a great guy. Smart, funny, and super cute in his photos. We agreed to meet at a trendy new restaurant downtown. The date started off amazing. Jake was even more charming in person. We laughed and talked for hours over dinner and drinks. I felt like I'd known him forever. Before I knew it, it was nearly midnight. Jake offered to drive me home since I'd taken an Uber there. I happily accepted, not wanting the night to end. As we got in his car, Jake suggested taking a scenic detour to show me this cool spot he knew of. I was having such a great time that I agreed without hesitation. At first, we were just driving through quieter residential streets, but soon the houses became more sparse, the streetlights fewer and farther between. An uneasy feeling started to creep in. We seemed to be heading out of the city entirely. I casually asked how much further this place was. Jake mumbled something vague about it being just up ahead. His tone had changed. He wasn't as warm and engaging anymore. The houses disappeared completely. We were on a dark, winding road with dense forest on both sides. No other cars in sight. My heart started racing. This didn't feel right at all. I told Jake I was getting tired and asked if we could head back now. He ignored me and sped up instead. Panic set in as I realized the danger I was in. How could I have been so stupid? I didn't really know this guy at all. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I try to grab the wheel? Jump out of the moving car? I had no idea where we were or how to get help. I noticed Jake kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Was he worried someone was following us, or making sure no one would see what he was about to do to me? My imagination went to horrible places. I felt utterly trapped and helpless. Just then, I remembered the pepper spray keychain in my purse. If I could get my hands on it without Jake noticing, maybe I'd have a chance. I casually reached for my purse on the floor, trying not to alert Jake. My fingers frantically searched for the small canister. Jake's eyes were fixed on the road ahead. We were going so fast now, taking sharp turns. The tires squealed. I gripped the pepper spray tightly, my thumb on the trigger. I had to time this perfectly. Suddenly, Jake slammed on the brakes. We screeched to a stop in a small clearing. This was my chance. As Jake turned towards me, I unleashed the pepper spray directly in his face. He howled in pain, completely disoriented. I flung open the door and ran as fast as I could into the woods. Branches whipped my face as I sprinted blindly through the darkness. I could hear Jake yelling and crashing through the trees behind me. Pure adrenaline propelled me forward. After what felt like hours, I finally saw lights in the distance. I emerged from the forest onto a main road. A gas station glowed like a beacon of hope. I burst through the doors, sobbing and begging the startled clerk to call the police. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and hospital examinations. I was physically okay, just some cuts and bruises from running through the woods. But I knew the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. They never caught Jake. His online profile was fake. The car he'd been driving was stolen. I tormented myself thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't acted when I did. The police said I was lucky to have escaped. It's been months now, but I still have nightmares about that night. I'm in therapy, trying to work through the trauma and learn to trust again. But it's a slow process. I'm much more cautious now. No more online dating for me. And I always carry pepper spray just in case. I know not every first date will turn into a horror story like mine did. But I hope sharing my experience will remind others to be careful. Trust your instincts. Have an exit plan. Let friends know where you're going. It's better to seem paranoid than to end up in real danger. Looking back, there were red flags I ignored. Jake was a little too perfect online. He pushed to meet in person very quickly. During the date, he pressured me to drink more than I was comfortable with. I should have listened to that little voice telling me something was off. I'm gradually regaining my confidence and independence. But I'll never forget how quickly a dream date turned into a nightmare. I'm just thankful I made it out alive to tell my story. I never thought a first date could turn into such a nightmare. It all started when I matched with Sarah on a dating app. Her profile looked promising, cute photos, similar interests, and a witty bio. We chatted for a few days and decided to meet up for drinks at a local bar. When I arrived, Sarah was already there. She looked even better in person, with a warm smile and stylish outfit. We hit it off right away, laughing and swapping stories over cocktails. She seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, asking lots of questions about my job, hobbies, and background. At first, I was flattered by all the attention. But as the night went on, I started to feel a bit uneasy. Sarah's questions were getting more and more personal, especially when it came to my finances. She wanted to know details about my salary, savings, and career aspirations. I tried to steer the conversation in other directions, but she kept circling back to money topics. Things took an even weirder turn when Sarah started gushing about this amazing business opportunity she was involved with. Apparently, it was some kind of health and wellness company that was going to revolutionize the industry. The way she described it, it sounded too good to be true. Flexible hours, unlimited earning potential, be your own boss, etc. My scam radar was starting to ping. The whole thing reeked of a multi-level marketing scheme. I politely expressed skepticism, but Sarah wouldn't take no for an answer. She kept pushing, insisting I'd be perfect for it and I had to get in on the ground floor. When I still wasn't biting, she suggested we continue the conversation somewhere more private. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go with her to a nearby coffee shop. Big mistake. As soon as we walked in, I realized it was a setup. 3 of Sarah's business partners were waiting for us at a table. They immediately launched into a rehearsed pitch about their company, complete with a flashy PowerPoint presentation on a laptop. I felt totally ambushed and cornered. Every time I tried to make an excuse to leave, they had a counter-argument ready. They tag-teamed me with question after question, barely letting me get a word in. The pressure was intense. They kept emphasizing how this was a limited-time offer, and I'd be foolish to pass it up. At one point, they even tried to get me to sign up on the spot and hand over my credit card info. That's when I knew I had to get out of there fast. I made up an emergency and said I had to go immediately. They seemed annoyed, but finally backed off a bit. As I was gathering my things to leave, Sarah made one last desperate attempt. She grabbed my arm and quietly offered to sweeten the deal if I signed up that night, while giving me a suggestive look. I was shocked and disgusted. This whole date had been nothing but a ploy to recruit me into their pyramid scheme. I firmly told Sarah and her cronies that I wasn't interested and practically ran out of there. My heart was pounding as I speed-walked down the street, half expecting them to chase after me. Luckily, they didn't follow, but I still felt shaken up. The next day, I woke up to a barrage of messages from Sarah and the others, still trying to convince me to join their business. I blocked all their numbers and reported Sarah's profile on the dating app. Looking back, there were probably some red flags I missed early on. I guess I was blinded by Sarah's looks and charm. It was definitely one of the worst dating experiences of my life. I felt used and manipulated. What I thought was a promising romantic connection turned out to be nothing but a scam. The whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth and made me wary of online dating for a while. I ended up taking a break from dating apps after that fiasco. I never thought I'd end up in a cult. That's not the kind of thing you expect when you're just trying to meet someone nice for a date. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and boy did I get a doozy. It all started when I matched with this guy Luke on a dating app. His profile looked great, handsome, into meditation and spirituality, works as a life coach. We chatted for a bit and he seemed really sweet and genuine. When he suggested meeting up for our first date at a weekend meditation retreat, I was intrigued. I'd always wanted to try something like that, and it seemed like a unique first date idea. The day of the retreat arrived and I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I packed an overnight bag and drove out to this remote property in the countryside. It was beautiful, all rolling hills and forests. The main building was this big old farmhouse that had been converted into a retreat center. Luke was there to greet me when I arrived. He gave me a warm hug and helped me with my bag. There were about 20 other people there for the retreat. Everyone seemed friendly enough, if a bit intense. They all wore these plain white outfits that Luke said were traditional meditation clothes. He gave me a set to change into. The first few hours weren't too bad. We did some guided meditations and breathing exercises. It was actually pretty relaxing. But then things started to get weird. The group leader, this guy they called the teacher, gave a long, rambling speech about finding your true self and breaking free from society's brainwashing. He kept talking about how we were all chosen and special. I started to get an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I glanced over at Luke, hoping to catch his eye, but he was staring raptly at the teacher with this glassy-eyed expression. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some New Age retreat. It was a cult. My mind started racing, trying to figure out what to do. I wanted to just grab my stuff and bolt, but I was afraid of causing a scene. Plus, we were in the middle of nowhere. I didn't even know exactly where we were located. As the day went on, it only got worse. There were more speeches about letting go of your old life and devoting yourself to the work. They kept us constantly busy with activities and rituals. I realized they were using sleep deprivation and sensory overload tactics to wear us down. Luke stuck close to me the whole time, always touching my arm or putting his hand on my back. At first, I thought he was being sweet, but I began to realize he was actually hurting me, making sure I didn't wander off or talk to anyone else alone. That night, we all slept in this big dormitory room. I lay awake for hours, my mind whirling. How had I gotten myself into this? How was I going to get out? I kept remembering stories I'd read about people who joined cults and never escaped. The thought of being trapped here forever made me feel sick. The next morning, I knew I had to act. They were planning to take our phones away that day as part of a digital detox. If that happened, I'd have no way to contact anyone outside. I pretended to be totally into everything, nodding and smiling. When we broke for lunch, I told Luke I wasn't feeling well and asked if I could go lie down for a bit. He seemed concerned but agreed, telling me he'd come check on me soon. As soon as I was alone, I grabbed my phone and ran. I sprinted through the woods, stumbling over roots and branches, my heart pounding. I could hear shouting behind me. They'd realized I was gone. I finally reached the main road and flagged down a passing car. The elderly couple inside looked alarmed at my appearance, wild-eyed, still in those white cult clothes, out of breath. But they let me in when I begged them to help. I called the police from their car and reported everything. They took it seriously, thank goodness. Within a few hours, the whole place was swarming with cops. They shut down the retreat and arrested the leaders. Turns out the whole thing was even worse than I realized. They'd been operating for years, scamming people out of money and keeping them isolated from their families. Luke wasn't just some innocent victim. He was one of their main recruiters, using dating apps to lure in new members. The aftermath was rough. I had to give statements to the police and talk to lawyers. My family and friends were shocked when they found out what happened. I felt so stupid for falling for it all. But mostly, I just felt incredibly lucky that I got out when I did. It's been a few months now, and I'm still processing everything. I've been seeing a therapist to work through it all. I deleted all the dating apps off my phone. I think I'll be taking a break from that scene for a while. Sometimes I still have nightmares about being trapped there. But mostly, I'm just grateful. Grateful that I trusted my instincts. Grateful that I found the courage to run. And grateful that I can use my experience to help educate others about the dangers of cults and how they operate. I never expected a first date to turn into a fight for my freedom. But life is full of surprises, both good and bad. All we can do is stay alert, trust our gut, and be ready to run like hell when we need to. I also made a rule to always meet in public places and have an exit strategy planned. The silver lining is that the experience taught me to trust my instincts more,